For the next hour and a half or so then, I want to talk about the scoring criteria for the essay. I'm going to describe the criteria. I'm going to use sample essays to demonstrate the criteria. I'm also going to use sample essays to focus explicitly on one component, theme development and text organization. I'm going to talk also about the supplemental scoring component, grammar and mechanics, but most of our time will be spent looking at the scoring for theme development and text organization. We've received questions primarily related to the scoring of theme development and text organization. So we want to make sure that based on this webinar and also followed by practice that you feel comfortable scoring the essays, especially the content component. We've pulled out one component from the WIAT-III, and if you've looked at the WIAT-III subtests, you know that there are subtests that measure oral language, that measure several components of reading, total reading, basic reading, reading comprehension, several subtests that load on the written expression composite, and several subtests that measure mathematics. Today we've pulled out one component from written expression. We've pulled out the essay composition, and we're focusing solely on scoring the essay composition. I believe later on this week, I think it's on Friday, we'll also be presenting a separate webinar just on scoring sentence composition. So in order to follow along, either you have the handout on your computer, it's projecting on your screen, or you have printed it out and you're accessing the information as I'm working through it. So I'm going to use a number of slides from that handout. I also sent you another document. It's a QuickScore guide for theme development and text organization. And I think it's particularly useful once you're comfortable with the conceptual component of the scoring procedure. So what I'd like to accomplish today is to demonstrate conceptually how we score theme development and text organization. And once you're comfortable with that component, I think using the QuickScore guide is going to be really helpful. I'm going to use, during my presentation today, 3 essays that come from the scoring workbook. I'm going to use cases 30, 24, and 20, and I'll use these cases to demonstrate certain key concepts when you think about the scoring criteria. In terms of the administration of the essay, and one of the things that you probably noticed if you looked at the record form for the WIAT-III is that on the front page of the record form, we identify each subtest, and off to the left on the record form, we identify the page number within the record form on which that subtest appears, and the essay appears on page 25 in the record form. When you're administering the essay, you will need the response booklet. The student is going to use the response booklet to produce the essay. You'll also use the record form. I'm sure you've noted that the administration directions are presented in the record form. We ask you to provide the examinee with a pencil without eraser. We also ask you to provide additional pages of lined paper. Within the response booklet itself, there are 2 pages of lined paper, and certainly the examinee can produce an essay that covers at least those 2 pages. So just in case the examinee writes more than 2 pages, we ask you to have available some extra lined pages. This is a time task. The time limit is 10 minutes, so we do ask you to use a stopwatch or a watch with a second hand. The essay is administered to individuals starting in grade 3, and going up to grades 12 and beyond. You can use the essay beyond 12th grade as well. In terms of the directions for administration, I indicated these are presented on the record form. You want the examinee to write an essay on the pages in the response booklet. You advise the examinee to do your best writing, write neatly so we can read it later, and then you associate this directive with the page in the response booklet that the examinee should use. There's also a blank page within the response booklet, and you let the examinee know that he or she can use that blank page to plan. Any planning that the examinee does will occur within that 10-minute time limit as well. In terms of the directions, the actual prompt we're asking the student to write about his or her favorite game and to include at least 3 reasons why he or she likes it. We'd like the examinee to write a full page, but certainly the examinee can write more than a full page. And this, when the examinee is ready, you say begin. Here is the page from the response booklet, and the prompt remains in front of the examinee while the examinee is writing. In order to generate a valid essay or an essay that would yield valid scores, you want the examinee to produce an essay that has at least 30 words. If the essay has fewer than 30 words, certainly you can go ahead and score the essay, but you want to use the data qualitatively. An essay that includes fewer than 30 words really does not provide us with an accurate estimate of the individual's written expressive abilities. So certainly you can evaluate the data qualitatively, and that will provide you with important information as well. In terms of planning the essay, the examinee can either use a visual, such as this maybe, or the examinee can use words, an outline, if he or she desires. But let's say in planning the essay, I decide that my favorite game is soccer, and I certainly want to respond to the prompt, and the prompt directed me to include at least 3 reasons why I like it. So my outline or my plan is going to be my favorite game, soccer. I like it because it's mentally challenging, it's a social activity, and it provides me with exercise. So I have the 3 reasons. And for each of these reasons, when you present the reason, the examiner or whoever might say, well, you think it's mentally challenging. Well, tell me more. And so I go ahead and tell you, well, it's mentally challenging because I have to judge the distance to goal. I have to figure out how to avoid an opponent. I may actually have more reasons for why I think that soccer is mentally challenging. I've illustrated here maybe 1 reason and 2 elaborations or 2 elaborative statements, but certainly the examinee can write more elaborative statements or maybe write just 1 elaborative statement. So this is basically the type of outline that you'll see when you think about the prompt on which we're asking the examinee to write. In terms of scoring, once I write the essay as the examinee, you're going to collect the information, and you're going to use a number of resources that are included with the WIAT-III kit to score the essay. You'll certainly need the examiner's manual. There are several appendices that provide the directions for scoring, appendices B6 and B7. I'm going to show you how you could use the scoring software to score the essay, and the QuickScore guide, of which you received a copy, also is something that's going to be helpful for you as you're scoring the essay. As you're becoming familiar with the scoring criteria, I think some of the sample essays that we present in the scoring workbook can illustrate some of the concepts when you think about scoring. So certainly when you get an essay from an examinee, referring to that scoring workbook to see if we generated a similar essay during standardization, that might be helpful for you as you're learning how to score the essay. In preparing to score the essay, and I included this in your handout in words, but I wanted to just show you the types of materials that you're going to need to score the essay. Certainly the record form, which is here, and the scoring criteria and spaces for you to actually note the essay are presented inside the record form. We ask you to make a copy of the student's essay, which I have over here. You can either make a copy or maybe put it on a transparency, but what we're asking you to do is to use the photocopied page to score the essay, to mark up, and to identify the different components instead of actually writing in the response booklet itself. You'll also need a pen or a pencil to record the scoring information, which you'll record here in the scoring workbook. You also ask the examinee, you want 2 colored pens or highlighters because you're going to be looking at several different criteria. We don't present the examinee with a graphic organizer. The examinee, you can tell the examinee that he or she can use the blank page to create a graphic organizer. And if students are learning that in their classrooms, certainly they can do that. But there's no requirement that they actually create an outline before they start writing. So you want to make sure that you have several colored pens or pencils or highlighters so that you'll be able to identify or differentiate maybe reasons from elaborations. In terms of the page inside the record form, this is the actual page that you will use to record the student's essay, looking at the thesis statement for the introduction, a thesis statement for conclusion, any keywords that are stated and restated, looking at transitions, reasons, and elaborations. The actual scoring criteria are presented right here for you. The overall score for the essay composition is based on two components. You're looking first at written productivity, which is going to be based on word count, the number of words that the examinee produced during the essay. The second component that will contribute to the overall score for essay composition is based on theme development and text organization. 6 different criteria will be evaluated when you're looking at theme development and text organization. First, is there an introduction? Is there a conclusion? How many paragraphs are there? Am I using transition words, words that will signal a connection between the ideas I'm presenting? Did I actually present 3 reasons? You asked me to present at least 3 reasons. So theoretically, I can present more than 3 reasons. But did I present at least 3 reasons? How about when I presented a reason, did I expand on that reason? Did I elaborate? When you look at the actual scores, you'll notice for introduction, the maximum possible score is 2 points. So you'll score either 0, 1, or 2 for both introduction as well as conclusion. Maximally, you'll have a score of 5 for paragraphs. Even if I produce more than 5 paragraphs, the maximum possible score is going to be 5. Same thing for transitions. The maximum possible raw score for transitions is 5. 3 reasons, maximum score for reasons, as well as elaborations. And I'll talk about each of these when I look at the specific scoring criteria. So looking at the maximum possible score for each of these components, you'll notice the maximum possible raw score for theme development and text organization will be 20, which is noted right here. You can generate a supplemental score based on the essay for grammar and mechanics. And I'll talk about correct and incorrect word sequences toward the end of our presentation today. So I'm going to spend a great deal of time moving forward, starting with my next slide, focusing on the scoring of theme development and text organization. So what am I looking for when I ask a student to respond to this particular prompt? Write about your favorite game and give me at least 3 reasons why you like it. Theoretically, I expect this writer, based on that prompt, to give me a paragraph for the introduction, to give me 3 reasons, 1 in each of 3 paragraphs, each reason presented in a separate paragraph, and then a final paragraph where you summarize. So essentially, I'm expecting at least 5 paragraphs. So if you think about a high-scoring essay, when you're looking at theme development and text organization, think about 5 paragraphs. 5 paragraphs, one of which would be an introduction. In the introduction, I expect the student or the examinee to respond to the prompt. You should tell me about your favorite game. That should be your thesis statement or your topic sentence. So in the introduction, you should have a thesis statement and you should state the reasons that you will present. So in essence, you're responding to the prompt in the introduction. My favorite game is soccer and I like it because it's a mental challenge, it is fun to play, and it's a social activity. So state the reasons that you'll be presenting. Then you also expect the examinee to use transitions. When you're writing an essay, you want to connect one paragraph to the next, the first to the second paragraph. And we typically use transition words to signal these connections. I asked you to present at least 3 reasons, and for the most part, I think examinees will present 3 reasons. 3 or more reasons to support the thesis statement, and if you present a reason, you should provide an elaborative statement following that reason. So you expect transitions, you expect 3 or more reasons, and you expect some elaboration to follow each reason. Then finally, you expect a conclusion. And in your conclusion, you should restate your thesis statement, and this is why I like soccer, and you should also summarize the reasons that are presented. I'm going to use case 30 to illustrate a high-scoring essay, an essay that embodies these 6 features. But before I get to that, I want to first look at scoring the word count. I'm going to use 2 cases from the scoring workbook to demonstrate the scoring of word count. Case 30, which is straightforward, and case 24, which includes a little anomaly that you want to be aware of when you're scoring word count. So on this one, case 30, which is an essay written by a student in grade 12, essentially all you do here is you count the number of words that the student has written. And I've written out here to the on the right side the number of words. Every word clearly appears to be separated from the next, so it's clear that each of these is a separate word. If I write numerals, you'll count a numeral as 1 word, for example. So on this one, 161 words. I think the one thing that you want to be aware of when you're counting number of words is an error that's associated both with the essay as well as with sentences. It's called a word boundary error. So on this one, for example, where I'm writing the word football, and foot is clearly separated from ball visually, I'd count that as 2 words. Same down here at the bottom where the individual is using the word football again. When you look at this one, the third reason is you play on a team. Visually, a team is 1 word. Again, that is a word boundary error, so you'll count that as 1 word. So apart from that, each of these would represent 1 word, and the total number of words for word count would be 38. I think the word boundary error is probably the one of which you want to be aware when you're counting the number of words. Okay. I'm going to go to scoring theme development and text organization now then. You want to make sure that you're familiar when you look at the examiner's manual, that you're familiar with the general scoring rules. First of all, it's important for us to recognize that when we're looking at theme development and text organization, we're not looking at written mechanics. We're looking at content and organization. Because we're not looking at mechanics, we will look at mechanics later with that supplemental score for grammar and mechanics, but because we're not evaluating mechanics here, we won't penalize for errors of capitalization, errors of punctuation, errors of spelling. We will want to identify certain components of grammar. We will want to identify independent and dependent clauses as well as complete sentences because we need to evaluate those in order to assign a score for some of the components of theme development and text organization. One of the things that you've probably noticed in the examiner's manual is that we've provided a number of pages where we've described or defined certain components of grammar. I want to pull out 3 of them because we're going to use those when we're evaluating theme development and text organization. What is an independent clause? Essentially, an independent clause is a group of words, and it could be a simple sentence that includes a subject and a predicate, but a group of words that includes a subject and a verb and that expresses a complete thought. It could stand alone as a sentence. So it could be a simple sentence like, I like football, or it could be a compound sentence. You'll notice here, I like football, I love soccer. Those are 2 separate independent clauses that are joined with this coordinating conjunction, but. So it could be a simple sentence that includes 1 independent clause, or it could be a compound sentence, or it could be a sentence that includes an independent clause or maybe several independent clauses along with a dependent clause. I like it because it's fun. Because it's fun is a dependent clause. I like it, and I also like playing it with my friends. So it could be a simple sentence, a compound sentence, or a complex sentence. The dependent clause to which I referred with the last sentence would be a group of words that includes a subject and a verb, but it does not express a complete thought, and it cannot stand alone as a sentence. It typically begins with a subordinate conjunction, maybe something like although, because, while, or it might begin with a relative pronoun, that or which. So here, for example, the example that I pulled out here, Susie bought a new car, a new smaller car, because it cost too much to repair her old car. So Susie bought a new smaller car would be an independent clause. Because it cost too much to repair her old car would be the dependent clause. Typically, you can use a dependent clause. You can either begin the sentence with a dependent clause, like in this case, for example, I could say, because it cost too much to repair her old car, Susie bought a new, smaller car. So you can start with the dependent clause, or you could start with the independent clause. And we'll use these concepts as we move forward. The other thing we're going to ask you to evaluate when you look at the essay is a complete sentence. An independent clause may be combined with other independent and dependent clauses to express a complete thought. I like soccer. Again, simple sentence, complete sentence. I like tennis, but I do not understand the rules of the game. Two separate independent clauses. I like tennis. I do not understand the rules of the game. These two independent clauses are combined into a complete sentence with this coordinating conjunction, but. I do not play soccer, and the dependent clause because my kicking skills are poor. So again, you're thinking about either simple sentences, compound sentences, or complex sentences. I've included for you a description of the scoring criteria for introduction, for conclusion, for paragraphs, and for all of the components, paragraphs and transitions, and also for reasons why and elaborations. Certainly that information is pulled directly from the examiner's manual. Instead of showing you those words and talking through those words, I'm going to use case 30 to illustrate conceptually what we're looking for when we're looking at these scoring criteria. So first, if you think about the scoring criteria, introduction, conclusion, paragraphs, transitions, reasons why, and elaborations. When you look at an essay, typically the introduction is either the first paragraph of the essay, and some individuals will not write separate paragraphs, that in which case the introduction is often the first sentence or the first sentences in the essay. In this case, it appears as if this examinee actually wrote a separate paragraph for introduction. Why do I say that? Because a paragraph typically is separated from another body of text, either by indentation, which is the case here, or sometimes they can use extra line spaces. So a separate body of text might be a paragraph, depending on the criteria that the WIAT-III uses for a paragraph. So in this case, the introduction is here, then you have the body, and down at the bottom, you have the conclusion. And typically, the conclusion is the last paragraph or the last sentence in the essay. So in this case, what we want to look at, first of all, is whether or not you will assign a score of 0, 1, or 2 for introduction first, and then for conclusion. So let's look at introduction first. When you're looking at the scoring criteria for introduction, in the introduction, you should have a qualifying thesis statement. The qualifying thesis statement should be a complete sentence that includes the name of a game and that expresses a fondness for the game. And you can express a fondness for the game by using a superlative like favorite, or you can express my best game, a superlative like best, or you can use a word like good, it's a good game, or you can say I like softball. So any of those positive adjectives would also express a fondness for the game. So in this case, you have a complete sentence that includes the name of a game, softball, and the writer is expressing a fondness for the game through the use of the word favorite. Next, the writer actually states his reasons in the introduction. What are his reasons? He gets exercise, he gets to throw a ball, and it's a challenge. If you have a qualifying thesis statement in your introduction, you have 1 point for introduction. If, in addition, you state your reasons in the introduction and restate them in the body, which is the case, he uses the exact same keywords to restate the reasons, exercise, throwing a ball, and challenge. If he states the reasons in the introduction and restates them, he gets a 2nd point for introduction. So in this case, 2 points for introduction. Then in the conclusion, what you're looking for is, again, did he state the reasons in the introduction, in the conclusion, and are those same reasons restated up here in the body? And that is the case. He likes it because he gets exercise. He uses the exact same keywords. So for conclusion, again, there is a qualifying thesis statement. For your conclusion, the qualifying thesis statement often will be an independent clause because what you typically want to do is use some transition word to move to that final paragraph. So I like softball is the qualifying thesis statement, and in addition, he also states his reasons using the same keywords. So 2 points for conclusion. The next thing that you want to look at is the transition words. Well, paragraphs first. So let's look at paragraphs. According to the WIAT-III criteria, a paragraph will have at least 2 sentences. We ask you to evaluate the ending punctuation marks for each separate body of text. So in this case, there is 1 ending punctuation mark. Here is a second. If there are at least 2 ending punctuation marks, that will be counted as a paragraph. So in this one, 1 paragraph. Next, separate body of text, you have 1 ending punctuation mark, another here. So this also would be considered a paragraph. And then your third body of text, here is 1, 2, 3, at least 2. So that's another paragraph. And then third, right here, you have at least 2 ending punctuation marks. Again, that's considered a paragraph. If you look at the last body of text down here, you'll notice there is only 1 ending punctuation mark right at the end. So only 1 sentence. In conclusion, I like it because X, Y, and Z ending punctuation mark. So of the 5 separate bodies of text, 4 of these are paragraphs based on the WIAT-III scoring criteria. The next thing that you want to look at are transition words. To evaluate transition words, evaluate every first word, the first word that follows an ending punctuation mark. So you can go and highlight all of the first words. And I think some of these, like softball, clearly don't connect ideas. But a word like first signals a connection. I'm going to tell you first, and then I'm going to connect that to something else. Next signals a connection. It doesn't signal a connection. Therefore, signals a connection. Third, signals a connection. So evaluate each word that follows an ending punctuation mark. And once you've looked at those words, you go to the list of acceptable transitions that is included in the examiner's manual and also in that quick scoring guide, and you identify the number of words that appear within that list. And you're looking for unique transition words. So if I used the word therefore several times, it'll only count once. So in this case, you have 5 unique transition words, so your raw score for transitions would be 5. The transition word for WIAT-III is always the first word following the ending punctuation mark. On some of them, we have two words, like the third. If I wrote the third, those two words would be considered the transition words. And those two words appear that way in the list of acceptable transitions. So we have, up to this point, we have 2 for introduction, 2 for conclusion, 4 for paragraphs, and 5 for transitions. Then you want to look at reasons why. The writer stated the reasons up here in the introduction and used the exact same keyword to restate the reasons in the body. So based on restatement, stating in the introduction and restating in the body, exercise, this is considered a reason. It's a complete sentence. Softball is my favorite because I get exercise. That is reason 1. Once you've identified the reason, look at the sentence immediately following the reason. Reasons and elaborations will get separate scores, but they're scored at the same time. So as soon as you identify a reason, look at the first sentence that immediately follows the reason. If that is an independent clause or a complete sentence, as long as it's not a contrasting statement, I don't use a contrasting word like but or however in front of that sentence, this will be considered an elaborative statement for the reason I get exercise. Notice that this writer actually gives you more than one elaborative statement. It doesn't matter. What you're looking for is that the writer elaborated on the reason, not that the writer gave you 2 or 3 different elaborative statements. So here you have reason 1, and here you have elaboration 1. Then you go to the next body of text. Again, he stated the reason and restated it using the same keywords, and this would be reason 2 based on restatement, and then this sentence following the reason is an elaboration for reason 2. And then the third one, he likes it because it's a challenge. Again, that same keyword was stated in the introduction. This would be reason 3 based on restatement. Then you evaluate the sentence immediately following the reason, and again, that's considered an elaboration. So you have 3 reasons that you're identifying based on restatement, and for each reason, the writer elaborated. So you're scoring on this one. You could pretty much use the page in your record form to summarize the essay. And if you do it this way, you'll notice that everything that the writer produced is included in this little schema right here, except for paragraphs. But in this case, the introduction, 2 points, conclusion 2, 4 for paragraphs, and then 5 for transition, 3 reasons, 3 elaborations. So the raw score here is 19 out of 20, and then you'll compare that. You'll convert that raw score to a standard score. So again, you notice when I wrote up the reasons here, I said softball is my favorite because I get exercise. You notice I have an A following that reason, A following the reason, and A2 following the elaboration. Restatement is one criterion that you could use to identify reasons, but it's one of several criteria. So when you identify a reason, you want to identify the criterion that you used to identify that statement as a reason. In this case, I used criterion A, which is restatement. Okay. Scoring reasons why. Certainly, restatement is one way to look at reasons why, and that is, as I mentioned, criterion A. To receive credit as a reason based on restatement, one or more keywords from the introduction and or the conclusion must be restated verbatim. You won't penalize if the examinee uses a word, the same word with a different word ending. For example, instead I said strategy in the introduction and I used strategic in the body. But you will penalize if I use a synonym. You must use the same keywords. And that's what I demonstrated with Essay 30. But let's say the individual didn't use restatement. Does that mean there are no reasons? Not necessarily. I could write several paragraphs, and for each paragraph, the first sentence of each paragraph is a sentence that summarizes everything in the paragraph. That's a qualifying topic sentence. For example, on this one, volleyball is a challenging sport. That summarizes everything else. It takes a lot of skill, coordination. The taller you are, the better player you have of becoming. In this particular case, here is a paragraph, and there's a qualifying topic sentence, and this would be identified as a reason based on criterion B. Then you're going to look to see how many reasons are followed by complete sentences. And for all of the other criteria I'm going to show you here, you're looking to see how many reasons are followed by an independent clause or a dependent clause beginning with because. B is the only one where a complete sentence must follow the reason in order for that sentence to be scored as an elaboration. The next one that you're going to look at is criterion C. And one of the things I want to show you, on Essay 30, we're not concerned about any of the other criteria because what you're doing to score reasons is you're starting with criterion A, and if you're not able to identify any reasons based on criterion A, you go to B. You're not able to identify any reasons based on B, you go to C and D and so forth. So for Essay 30, I didn't even look at the remaining criteria because I identified all three reasons based on criterion A restatement. I may present my reasons using bullets or numbers. For example, here are some numbers. Each one of these would be considered a reason, or I may present my reasons in bulleted form. But let's say I didn't use any bullets or numbers. Did I maybe use an enumerative word or phrase like 1, 2, 3, or third, first, for example? But let's say I didn't use that either. Maybe my essay includes the word reason or reasons, but let's say I didn't. Does it include the phrase that is why or this is why? So this is really the process that you want to use when you're identifying reasons. And then criterion G, how many independent clauses or complete sentences include a superlative, best or most or greatest, 0. How many include an additive conjunction other than and, maybe also, in addition to? And this criterion I is often used, does the essay include the word because? I like it because. And let's say the answer is no, reasons why raw score 0, you quit the scoring guide. I'm not going to talk about criterion K today just because I think I want to spend time making sure that you're clear about this process, but you also want to take a look at criterion K in the appendix. Let me say something about criterion I, because. Often individuals will use the word because to present their reasons. If I use the word because and it doesn't immediately follow a reason I identified, so let's say, also I like it because, you already identified that as a reason based on the additive conjunction also. If I use the word because, you won't, in that same sentence, you won't count that as a reason. So in this case, for example, I like it because it's fun, that's a reason. And because it's exciting. This immediately follows this identified reason, so this is not scored as a reason. This one is scored as a reason. I'm going to show you an example of this when I show you an actual essay, but this second because here is actually scored as an elaboration. So you want to look to see if because immediately follows the reason. And if that is the case, the first use of because is scored as a reason. The second is scored as an elaboration. The other thing, let me skip this and I'll show you on a different page. In general, when you think about scoring reasons and elaborations, I talked about the fact that you look at these, you evaluate those concurrently. Also, I indicated a statement must be an independent clause or a complete sentence to receive credit as a reason. A clause or sentence beginning with because that immediately follows a reason will receive credit as an elaboration. And there's a good example I know that's coming up here. So I want you to take a look at these. For example, I love soccer because it is challenging. I try my best. How many reasons here? Certainly, I love soccer because it is challenging. I will score that as a reason based on criterion I. And this statement is a complete sentence that immediately follows the reason. It's not a contrasting statement. It doesn't contrast with the reason. So here you would have one for reasons, one for elaborations. On this one, I love soccer because it is challenging, but I always try my best. Again, you identify this as a reason based on the use of the word because, but because this is a contrasting statement, the use of the word but indicates that what I'm going to write next is in contrast to what I just said, elaborations, that would receive a score of 0. Same thing, I'm good at it because I'm strong. Reasons 1, I practice every day. That's an independent clause that is not a contrasting statement. Elaborations would be 1. I'm good at it because I'm strong. 1 for reasons, yet again indicates a contrasting word. The score for elaborations would be 0, sorry. Okay. All right. So let me just show you one thing using Essay 30, and then I'm going to move here. I talked about the fact that I scored these as reasons based on restatement. But what you know now about scoring reasons, it's clear that if I hadn't used the same keywords, if I hadn't stated them and restated them using the same keywords, I still could have identified these as a reason. I could have looked at criterion D, enumerative word or phrase, first, next, third. I could have still identified them as a reason. I could also have identified these as reasons based on criterion I, the use of the word because. But I never got to criterion D or criterion I because I actually looked at restatement. I identified all 3 reasons based on restatement, so I didn't move beyond criterion A. So often you'll have essays that'll use several different ways to present reasons, and you will use the criterion that appears highest in that whole process. So starting with A and then moving down to I. So let me look at the QuickScore guide, of which you have a copy. Essentially, once you understand the scoring criteria, we believe that you'll be able to read the essay, and you read the essay, and while you're reading, you're actually looking for some key concepts. You're scoring the introduction, scoring the conclusion, looking at the number of paragraphs, any transition words, and then you want to identify, highlight the reasons why, score the reasons why, and then score elaborations. So let me show you another example in terms of presenting this. So let me just give you a few seconds here to read through this one. Okay, so this is an essay written by a student in grade 7 who was diagnosed with a reading disorder and a disorder of written expression. And essentially, you'll notice here what appears to be one separate body of text, which tells you that at best the score for paragraph is going to be a 1. And it will be a 1 if there are at least 2 ending punctuation marks. So I think that's the first thing that is obvious as you're looking at this. So look at the score for paragraphs. There are at least 2 ending punctuation marks, so this will be 1 for paragraphs. Then you want to look at the introduction. This doesn't have an introductory paragraph. It has an introductory sentence. I like football a lot. What that tells you immediately is that at best your score for introduction is going to be a 1. If this is a qualifying thesis statement, the score is going to be 1. I like football a lot. It's a complete sentence, includes the name of a game, expresses a fondness for the game by using the word like. So introduction, 1 point. Doesn't state the reasons in the introduction, so we know right away that restatement will not be the criterion we'll use to evaluate reasons. Then you look at conclusion. This is why I like football. The conclusion is your last sentence or your last paragraph. Again, does it include an independent clause that includes the name of the game and that expresses a fondness? Yes, I like football. Conclusion 1. Then you look at paragraphs. We already talked about 2 ending punctuation marks, 1 paragraph. Then you want to look at transition words. Look at the first word following the ending punctuation mark. 1, reasons. 2nd, reason. 3rd, reason. This is. All 4 of these, when we look at the list of acceptable transitions, these 4 words appear in that list. So transitions score is 4. Then you want to look at reasons. And this student actually makes it easy for us because he uses the same method to present all 3 reasons. Criterion D, an enumerative word or phrase. 1 reason is you can tackle the runner. 2nd reason is it is a fun sport to play. 3rd reason is you play on a team. So he has 3 reasons presented here using criterion D, an enumerative word or phrase. There is nothing that follows the reason, so there are no elaborations. He stated his reasons but did not elaborate. So you have your scores, 3 for reasons why, 0 for elaborations. And that pretty much is the scoring, and that's the process that you want to use when you look at the quick score guide. Again, you count the number of words, and you notice this is the same essay I used earlier to show you that word count. So in this case, his thesis statement is here. Thesis statement for conclusion is over here. You note your transition words, and you want to write them down so you'll be clear that each is a unique transition word. And then you notice all of the reasons over here. And again, I've noted the criterion D that I used and no elaborations. So the raw score for this essay will be 10. The other thing that you can do, there are several ways, certainly using the information in the examiner's manual, using the quick score guide, can also use the scoring software. And if you use the scoring software, the software will prompt you to answer questions, and the software itself will generate the score for the essay. Within the software program, there are several different resources. The list of acceptable transitions to which I've been referring is included with the software as well. Also, some of the helpful definitions that are also included in the examiner's manual are integrated with the software. So I want to use case 20, and I've called this one Hide and Seek. It's written by a student in grade 5, and I want to take a look at this essay because I want to walk you through the scoring using the scoring software. So again, let me give you just a minute to read through this one. Okay. Again, relatively short essay. And on this, you'll notice, I'm sure as you're reading this, and also when we looked at the previous essay, case 24, you notice there were a number of misspelled words. There were a number of words that were syntactically incorrect. Again, remember, we're going to be ignoring those as we're evaluating theme development and text organization. Those will be really important when we look at the supplemental score for grammar and mechanics. So in this case, I've generated the number of words, 51 words, and I'll use that when we look at the actual scoring. But on this one, I want to walk you through the scoring, the way that you would score this using the software program. And I hope one of the things that you're noticing, the first essay I showed you used the same criterion to present the 3 reasons, restatement. The second essay that I showed you used a different criterion, but also was consistent in his use of the enumerative word or phrase in presenting the reasons. This one uses different methods to present reasons. So we'll take a look at how the software program will accommodate for that. So here's a screenshot of the actual software program, and I went in and created a record for a student I named Hide and Seek. And I named it Hide and Seek based on the favorite game that he selected. On this one, you'll notice over here, This is where you'd enter the raw scores for the essay composition. So you'll start out by entering the raw score for word count, and you notice I've done that. It's 51. Then I'm going to go to scoring of the introduction. Notice that, again, the possible scores 0 to 2. So I'll go to the introduction, and I'll click on this little button right here. Okay, 1 second, let me see. Once I click on this little button right there, it'll actually take me to introduction, the criteria for scoring introduction. You'll notice here it's going to ask me some questions first, but before I get started, it's telling me to read the information provided down here in the pane. It's telling you to make a copy of the student's essay, to use a transparency, to get different colored pencils, those kinds of things that we talked about earlier. Then it's going to start asking you questions to assign scores. Remember, there are 2 criteria that must be evaluated to determine the score for introduction. So here is A. Does the introduction include a qualifying thesis statement? The answer is yes. And if you have any questions about what a qualifying thesis statement is, you can read down here at the bottom. Here is the first sentence. Hide and seek is a good game. That is a complete sentence. I'm going to disregard the fact that there's no ending punctuation mark. Hide and seek is a good game. It includes the name of a game. It's a complete sentence, and the writer expresses a fondness for the game. So I'm going to say here, yes. So the answer is either yes or no. And then you'll move on to the second question, and it should ask you about restatement. So, well, first of all, before I get to that, you want to make sure that you're noting the actual responses that are going to be used to assign scores, and this is the part of the record form. But the next question that's going to be asked when you look at the introduction is about restatement. Are all of the reasons in the introduction also restated in the body of the essay using at least one of the same keywords for each reason? The answer to this question is no. So I'm going to say no in this case. The writer did not state the reasons and restate them. And once I say no, the program itself will actually assign a score. So you're going to hit now Save and Close. You click on Save and Close up here, and then it'll go back to the beginning screen, and you'll see the score of 1 will appear right here for introduction. Then you'll move on to scoring conclusion. And I want you to take a look at the essay here for a second. Take a look at this essay. Certainly there is an introductory sentence, but if you read this essay, the third reason I like it is you can pretend to play that game to hide away from your parents. This essay comes to an abrupt end. It does not include a concluding statement. So click on your little taskbar for conclusion and answer the questions. And the first question is going to be whether or not there is a qualifying thesis statement. Does the conclusion include a qualifying thesis statement? The answer is no. You're done. You've completed the scoring guide for conclusion. You choose Save and Close, and then it'll take you back to that screen. You should see 0 for conclusion. Okay, so here you have 0 for conclusion. Then you go to scoring of paragraphs. And to score the paragraphs, again, you're going to be looking at the ending punctuation marks. So scoring paragraphs, and let's see here, this is taking a little minute. So scoring paragraphs, does the essay include at least 2 ending punctuation marks? And you'll notice it includes 3, so you'll choose yes. Then you'll move forward on this one, and it'll ask you how many. Do 1 or more paragraphs include 2 or more ending punctuation marks? The answer is yes. 1 or more paragraphs do include more than 2. And then it'll ask you the final question here, how many, and you'll actually enter that number. Enter the number of paragraphs that include 2 or more ending punctuation marks, and that number is 1. In this case, just like on Essay 24, you'll notice it's only one body of text. So in this case, what will determine whether or not the score is going to be 1 would be the number of ending punctuation marks, which in this case is 3. So now you have a score for paragraphs, and you'll notice it's 1. Then you go on to transitions. And again, for transitions, you'll be evaluating the first word following each ending punctuation mark. So let's say if a student doesn't use any punctuation marks at all, clearly you will have no transition words. So does the essay include at least one ending punctuation mark? The answer to that question is yes. Then it takes you further. Review the essay, look at the first word that follows each ending punctuation mark. How many of these words are included in the list of acceptable transitions? And you'll notice right here as you're working through the scoring software, you can actually pull up the list of acceptable transitions. It'll come up in a separate box for you. On this one, though, there are two words that follow the ending punctuation marks. One is you, the other is third. The word third appears in the list of acceptable transitions. See if I can get that to project here for you. This is the screen that will actually show up when you are using the software program. Notice that the word third appears in that list, and notice that I have indicated here one word appears in that list of acceptable transitions. So when I get back to my main screen then, I should see a score of 1 for transitions. Okay, let's see. So here is 1 for transitions. And then you'll go to reasons why. And reasons why will walk you through the process. It'll start first with criterion A, restatement. How many independent clauses in the body include words that are restated? Well, he didn't state anything in the introduction, so there's clearly no restatement. As you were reading this, based on what you know, you probably identified and highlighted this word right here, because, and you probably highlighted the word third because you know that third is an enumerative word, and because would be criterion I. So you've already looked at the essay and identified possible independent clauses or complete sentences that might be reasons. So I'm going to look at this, no restatement. So I say, how many? 0. It'll take you immediately to criterion B. Criterion B is a qualifying topic sentence. Let me just give you this little clue. If you only have one body of text, the first sentence or the first sentences are going to be the introduction. So if there's only one body of text, you will not have a qualifying topic sentence. A qualifying topic sentence summarizes everything within that paragraph, except if there's only one paragraph, I must use the first sentences to actually to respond to the prompt. That'll be my topic sentence or qualifying thesis statement. So you go to B, for essay 30, notice there is no need for you to go down to criterion I if you've already identified the reasons based on criterion A, for example. For the second essay I showed you, based on criterion D, it was clear from reading that essay that you would use an enumerative word to identify the reasons. That's when you stop. But on this one, and I'm using this deliberately because we've looked at use of the same criterion, I want to show you an example of when an individual uses different criteria to present reasons. So in this case, no qualifying topic sentences. The answer is no, so you go immediately to criterion C. For criterion C, and I think once you get used to this, you'll know exactly which criteria you're moving toward. Does it include bullets or numbers? No, it does not. So you go immediately to criterion D. Criterion D, the essay does include an independent clause that includes an enumerative word or phrase. That enumerative word is third. Again, if you look at the resources and down at the bottom here, we'll define for you an enumerative word or phrase, something that specifies number or order, for example, in this case, third. So I say, yes, the essay includes an independent clause that uses an enumerative word. Then it's going to ask me how many. Notice here this statement. It's 1 in this case, but do not include a thesis restatement or any statements that you already identified as a reason in your answer. So let's say I use an enumerative word or phrase like in essay 30 first. I am not going to use criterion D to identify that as a reason because I've already identified it as a reason using criterion A. But in this case, this is the first time I'm looking at this sentence. So I'm going to say one independent clause uses an enumerative word or phrase, and then you move on to the next component. And the next component is going to be, are enumerative words or phrases used effectively as the only means of presenting the student's reasons? Why am I asking you that? If I only used enumeration, if you say yes in this case, it won't go to E. It won't go to F. It'll stop right here and it'll ask you about elaborations. But in this case, it's not the only way because I know there is a because within that essay. So I say no. Does the essay include anything that uses the word reason or reasons? Yes, right down here it says third reason. But you already know that I've already identified this whole statement as a reason based on this enumerative word right here. So even though I have to say yes, it includes the word reason, I'm not going to count that again because I've already identified it as a reason based on a previous criterion. Does the essay include independent clauses that, what's happening here? Okay, hold on one second. Okay, it seems like Does it include that? Yes. I said yes on this one, and then I am moving forward. It's going to ask me how many, and the actual response to that first one is 1. However, do not include a thesis restatement or statements already identified. So I'm going to say 0 because I've already identified that as a reason. And then you go to criterion F. Does it have that's why or this is why? The answer is no. The next one is how many independent clauses include a superlative? None. And I know already that the next criterion is going to be I, which is because. H, does it include an additive conjunction? Also in addition to? The answer is no. But then you get to because. Does it include the word because? The answer is yes. I like playing that game at home because there is lots of places to hide. So the answer is yes. Then it's going to ask me to elaborate on this. How many sentences include the word because? 1. Again, if I'd identified that as a reason before, I wouldn't be looking at it here, but I have not. And then the next one is, how many dependent clauses beginning with because do not immediately follow a highlighted reason? We don't have to worry about that because there's only one dependent clause that begins with because, and that's the one that we're going to use to identify a reason. So the answer here is 0, and then it's going to ask you about elaborations. Okay. Of all the reasons you've identified so far, how many are immediately followed by an independent clause that is not a contrasting statement, or a dependent clause or complete sentence that begins with because? So look at your reasons. This was your first one, the third reason, and this is the end of that sentence. So nothing follows that first reason, the reason we identified based on criterion D. The second reason we identified based on criterion I. I like playing that game at home because there is lots of places to hide. Immediately following that reason is a complete sentence. You can play it anywhere, anytime, any place. That is an elaboration for this reason we identified based on criterion I. Now, one of the things I think that strikes you when you're reading this essay is that the writer probably intended to present 3 reasons, and I believe that to be true. Why? Because as far as I'm concerned, he gave me his first reason here, he gave me a second one here, and he gave me a third one here. And I believe that this is meant to be a reason because he used the enumerative word third. However, you cannot score this as a reason because it doesn't meet any of the identified criteria starting with A and culminating with I. So instead, you identify that as an elaboration for that reason. So then you move forward. Any other like, do one or more previously identified reasons include an additive conjunction? Maybe I have a really long sentence. I talk about and, will also, or in addition to. You might be able to identify something else as a reason. In this case, we can't. So we hit save and close, and then you should get the actual scoring right here. Okay. So in this particular case, you'll have the word count, 1 for introduction, no conclusion, 1 paragraph, 1 transition word, the word third, 2 reasons, 1 based on criterion D, 1 based on criterion I, and then 1 elaboration following the criterion I reason. Your raw score is going to be 6. And then you notice down at the bottom that you also have space to enter your scores for grammar and mechanics. If you choose to get that supplemental score, it'll be based on correct word sequences and incorrect word sequences, and the difference between the two will be the raw score. But you'll enter your score for correct and incorrect, and the program will compute the score for the raw score for that component. Okay. Let me just say this. I think sometimes that students present or examinees present essays that aren't clearly representative of any of the essays that are included in the scoring workbook. Certainly, when you have situations like that, I think inter-score reliability is really important. So if you have concerns about an essay, about your scores, I think the way that we become comfortable with the scoring criteria would be to interact with our colleagues. And certainly from our perspective, if you have essays and you have questions about the scoring, you can send them to me. And if I don't know the answer, I'm happy to send them on to our research directors, because we want to make sure that you're comfortable scoring the essay. So the last part that you're going to look at, now you have information on written productivity through the raw score for word count. You also have information on my ability to organize and express my ideas in written form. And certainly if you think about theme development and text organization, there are a number of basic skills components that are necessary to write an essay, to organize and present my ideas in writing. So what if you're working with an individual and the individual actually has a really good vocabulary but may not be able to write down those words? And when you look at the content and organization, you notice that the score is really high, but it might be that we need to focus some intervention or some time on the basic skills component. In situations where I believe, especially that hide-and-seek essay that I just showed you, it's clear that there are some syntax and grammar components that we want to look at. Also at the second essay that I showed you, a number of misspelled words. So certainly we're ignoring grammar and mechanics to some extent when we're evaluating theme development and text organization, but we're not going to ignore it completely, especially if it impacts the individual's performance. So you may need to generate this supplemental score for grammar and mechanics, and you're going to be looking at the correct word sequences. So you're going to look at every 2 adjacent words, and you want to make sure that they're spelled correctly, that they're grammatically correct within the context of the phrase. You want to make sure that the individual is capitalizing correctly, using punctuation correctly. The incorrect word sequence would be any 2 adjacent words or spaces that are not identified as a correct word sequence. Again, you want to make sure that you look at the rules for scoring in Appendix B7. And I'm going to look at case 34, but case 34 is actually the same case that we just looked at. It's that hide-and-seek case. Hang on one second. Okay, what happened here? Okay, just one second. Okay, so let me just tell you the scoring rules. Everything that we talk about in scoring the essay, if we don't give you a specific rule to use, it means that we're assuming that you're going to be looking at standard rules of written grammar and mechanics. One of the things that we don't address explicitly is a rule that I think is clear. When you're writing a sentence, you must start the first letter with a capital. You must have some ending punctuation mark. So those standard rules of written grammar and mechanics are not necessarily explicitly addressed in the examiner's manual. Again, just like when you're looking at alphabet writing fluency or spelling, if you think that any production appears to be poor because of my penmanship or maybe visual motor integration, you won't penalize for that. One of the things you'll notice when you're looking at grammar and mechanics is that correct capitalization and correct ending punctuation are weighted more heavily than correct spelling. So, for example, if you look at this, certainly you're looking at these two adjacent words, we went, so the misspelled word we will certainly impact these two adjacent words. But you notice over here, we've identified the importance of that first capital by associating a correct word sequence, that caret, with a capital W. And then you look at these two adjacent words, those are correct. We went to the movies. The movies is misspelled, and certainly that'll impact these two adjacent words. And then we also identify the correct ending punctuation by the use of that caret right there. You want to make sure that you're familiar with the general scoring rules in the appendix. Certainly it's okay to begin, we say it's okay to begin a complete sentence with the conjunction and. There are a number of grammar textbooks that say it's not okay to begin a sentence with the conjunction and. But for the WIAT-III, we identify that. Most grammar textbooks will say it's okay to begin a sentence with because. You won't penalize for abbreviations that are commonly used. You won't penalize if I use a hyphen or don't use a hyphen. You won't penalize for using slash marks, like here, for example. You do penalize if I use a symbol instead of a word, and we give you some examples. But don't penalize for dollar and percentage symbols if I'm using those in conjunction with numerals. So a number of more specific components are addressed. So in order for two adjacent words to be identified as a correct word sequence, they should be spelled correctly, capitalized correctly, punctuated correctly, so basic mechanics. So you're looking at mechanics here, then you're looking at grammar, syntax, as well as semantics. So this is the page from your record form, and you will end up with a number of correct word sequences and a number of incorrect word sequences, and then you will have the difference if you're scoring this manually. So let's look at case 34, and we've already looked at this. And I'm sure when you were reading it for the theme development component, you noticed there is not an ending punctuation mark right here. You also noticed probably that when you're reading this, did we miss an article right here, maybe, the third? You probably also noticed a number of misspelled words, and you'll be able to capture these errors of mechanics and any errors of grammar through that supplemental score. If you look at these words, all of the words that this writer used actually resemble the correct word when pronounced. So, for example, like, and that's the reason that it's not going to be penalized when you're looking at theme development and text organization, because we could still figure out what the writer intended to communicate. But when you're thinking about the fact that words have a unique orthography or they are represented in a certain way visually, we want to make sure that we focus on these components when we think about this particular learner. So here is a learner, an examinee, for example, an individual in grade 5 who is probably saying the word parents and actually associating a sound with each of the associating a symbol with each sound that he hears. And certainly if you think about the word parents, unless I know that visually that should be an E, I might hear that I, parents, or I might hear like when I'm saying it to myself and then isolating the sounds and then associating a symbol with each sound. So this component here will start out probably with with a caret right there to make sure that we capture the initial capitalization of the word, and certainly we want to make sure that we capture the omission of the ending punctuation mark here. And then in between hide and seek, certainly that two-word pair appears to be okay. Hide and seek is a good game, is okay, good game, this is okay. This is okay right here. So essentially what you're looking at is the the symbol, what you're looking at on this one, is making sure that you capture the relationship between two adjacent words. Let me say something about this piece right here, and then I'll show you the actual scoring. You may look at this P right here and say that that actually appears to be a large P, a capital P. One of the rules, and I think we actually talk about that when we're looking at basic rules for this component, is you do not penalize solely based on the size of a letter. So you might look at this and say, that's a capital P. And the only way that you'd come to that conclusion is because it looks bigger than the small p. If you are looking at a letter that does not change form with case, so in this case, the uppercase and the lowercase form of the P doesn't change form. It's the exact same form. The only difference is the size. For any letter that doesn't change form with case, do not penalize solely based on that fact. However, if I were to write a big E, for example, that looks like this, versus a small e, a letter that does change form with case, if I were to write that in the middle of a sentence, you would penalize for that. But this individual actually wrote a number of P's, and they all appear to be larger, but the only thing that differentiates is the size. So don't penalize simply based on the size. So again, I'm going to be looking here at the fact that there's no ending punctuation right here, that there's a word omission and some misspelled words. So in the scoring workbook itself, we've actually presented this as a sample that's already scored. So you notice that we've captured here by this caret, we've captured the initial capitalization, we've captured the omission of that ending punctuation mark, and then we've captured the relationship between these two words, and then this here captures the relationship between playing and that. Also, you notice that we've captured the capitalization of this word here. You notice there are two little carets that are right here, one to capture the ending punctuation mark and one to capture that capitalization of that first letter. If I omit a word, you want to still capture the fact that this is capitalized, which we do by using this caret, and then the omission of that word comes after the word itself. So the third, this is to indicate that there should be a definite article right there. Then you capture the misspelling between I and like, the misspelling between like and hide. So realize that a misspelled word actually sometimes affects two word sequences, as it does in this particular case. And on this one, again, you want to capture that misspelled word, pretend it affects this word sequence as well as this word sequence. And then for parents, we capture this, and we also want to capture the use of that ending punctuation. So over here, you have all of your correct word sequences. You count the number of carets by row, the number of incorrect word sequences by row, and then the raw score will be the difference between the two. And then on the scoring software program, I showed you at the bottom, I showed you actually the place where you would enter this component 43 and 11, and then you end up generating a score for all components of the essay.